All right, so in the aftermath of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis pulling that pretty disgusting political stunt where he shipped off a bunch of Venezuelan asylum seekers up to Martha's Vineyard to basically try to own the libs and make a point for his, future presidential ambitions, we've had some pretty questionable, to say the least, statements that have come out from the Biden administration who are trying to diagnose maybe why some of these people are fleeing their home countries and coming here to the southern border of the United States. So let's go ahead and jump into this clip. We have Biden's spokesperson here, Karine Jean-Pierre, giving her thoughts on why these people are trying to come into the United States in the first place. So let's go ahead and jump into this.
These people are fleeing communism, as we have said, as you heard DHS say as well. Falling authoritarian regimes in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba are causing a new migration challenge across the Western Hemisphere. Let's remember, these folks are fleeing communism. When you think about Venezuela, what's going on in Venezuela, when you think about what's going on in Nicaragua, when you think about what's going on in Cuba, they are fleeing political persecution only to be used as a political pawn by the Florida governor. They are using people who are leaving a communist countries as political stunt. So the way that we see it is alerting Fox News and not city or state officials about a plan to abandon children fleeing communism on the side of the street is not burden sharing. That is not the definition that we see of burden sharing. It is a cruel, premeditated political stunt. That is not what that is what they are doing. They have used the lives of people who are fleeing persecution from communist countries, using them as a political stunt.
Okay, so you guys get the point, right? I mean, she hammered it home there about 1 billion times over the course of this press conference that she was holding. Obviously, they edited this together to show all of the various times that she was basically blaming communism as the main driving force for why these people are fleeing these countries and trying to come to the United States. So a number of different things off the bat. Obviously, if you watched my video a couple days ago covering Ron DeSantis's stunt by shipping off those migrants up to Martha's Vineyard, yes, that was absolutely disgusting, and it was a political stunt, right? That part of this is pretty much the only part that was actually true. Now, on the other points of this, I mean, number one, just as at a fundamental level, okay, does anybody really believe that the United States of America has some sort of a principled opposition against authoritarian governments? No, absolutely not. In fact, if you go and look at statistical breakdowns on this, the United States, in fact, outright supports, whether we're giving them aid and, funding or military weapons or diplomatic support, or we have alliances with them, an outright majority of authoritarian governments around the world. Okay, so that's number one. We have absolutely no principled opposition against authoritarianism at a fundamental level. Okay, you can just look at, Biden's recent meeting with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, the UAE. He's perfectly willing to go and cozy up to authoritarians, to dictators, to people who violently repress their people. That is just not something that is a valid point to be making in terms of the United States right now or historically, okay? We have always supported and endorsed dictators and authoritarians around the world. So that's number one. Obviously, this is not about authoritarian governments. Now, we get to the main point here, which is obviously them using this and weaponizing this current situation to do a very classic sort of McCarthyite anti-communist attack against a lot of these countries that just so happen to be opposed to allowing U.S. multinational corporations to exploit their resources and their labor, relative to other countries in the region that the United States considers to be allies. So just at a fundamental level, again, on the second point, are these people really fleeing communism? I mean, is that what they're fleeing? Because if you want to draw a comparison here between economic philosophies or economic ideological frameworks, right, between capitalism and communism, just in a core level, which one of these is inherently authoritarian or has qualities of authoritarianism? Is it the communist system that wants to eradicate the private property of giant corporations and landlords and business people and wants to return economic democracy and expand democracy not only in the political systems but also in the economic realm? Is that the one that has authoritarian qualities, or is it the system, such as capitalism, which has an inherent hierarchical structure to it, where you have a handful of people who sit at the top of these companies, the boards of directors, the executives, the CEOs, the shareholders, who get to completely unilaterally control the lives of millions and millions of workers who are working under them for wages under a system which is, I think, accurately defined as wage slavery? I mean, which one of these systems just just at a core level, is actually similar to authoritarianism. I mean, it's unquestionably more so the capitalist system. There is nothing about communism as an economic philosophy, as a political philosophy, that is inherently authoritarian. Now, on the flip side of that, you could definitely make some arguments that there have been countries, either right now to this day or historically, who have used the label of communism or socialism and self-identified in that way, and that also do have authoritarian tendencies and authoritarian policies as well, right? There's no contradiction there. That's completely fine, and it's fine to critique some governments for overbearing authoritarian tactics. That's not the problem here. The problem is that you are using this opportunity in order to weaponize this narrative against communism, when this has absolutely nothing to fucking do with communism as an actual ideology or as an actual economic philosophy, and it has much more to do with U.S. imperialism and involvement historically in this region, and even to this day, and even some of the countries that she was putting on blast there specifically, like Venezuela. I mean, we just saw a couple of years ago under the Donald Trump administration, they straight up tried to do a coup attempt and install this guy Juan Guaido to be the president of Venezuela and topple the Maduro government. I mean, this is something that we are actively doing right now and have done obviously throughout the entirety of modern American history. So the idea that like you're going to pin this on communism instead of pinning this on the realities of what these people are living in, then that's just a completely absurd argument at face value. I mean, what are these people actually fleeing, right? Besides the scary communist specter that is haunting the United States of America, apparently, what are they actually fleeing? Okay, if you actually go and look at what they're saying, they're fleeing things like political instability, violence. They are in some cases fleeing repression. They are in many cases fleeing the consequences of the ongoing threat of climate change. They are fleeing from the consequences of the drug war that the United States has continued to perpetuate in Latin America. I mean, at a core level, these people are basically fleeing the consequences of institutionalized poverty. And so if you want to give a historical lens in terms of why these people are ending up in these types of situations, why these countries are ending up in these types of situations where they do have political instability, they do have rampant violence that is not being addressed, well, let's just go ahead and look at a historical perspective in terms of the United States' involvement in Latin America over the last couple of centuries. Because not only was the point that she was making there completely whitewashing this entire history that we're about to get into here of U.S. imperial involvement in toppling democracies and installing and supporting and arming far-right fascist dictatorships and doing trade deals that are extremely exploitative and serve to benefit the U.S. multinational corporations instead of the actual people of these countries. Not only are you whitewashing that entire history, but you are also using this narrative to perpetuate the continuation of imperial involvement in Latin America and, these continued attempts to depose of any left-wing governments that the United States decides are not beneficial to us economically. So here from AP, they actually put together a little bit of a good list here. Now, on U.S. involvement in Latin America, keep in mind, this is just barely scratching the surface. I think there have been over like 56 U.S. Military or CIA interventions within Latin America over just the last like 50 years or so, or since like the 1960s. So this is barely just scratching the surface, but we can get into some examples here to give you some perspective. They say, to start us off here, some of the most notable U.S. interventions in Latin America. In 1846, the United States invades Mexico and captures Mexico City. In 1847, a peace treaty the following year gives the U.S. more than half of Mexico's territory, what is now most of the western United States. 1903, the U.S. engineers the Panamanian independence from Colombia and gains sovereign rights over the zone where the Panama Canal would connect the Atlantic and Pacific shipping routes. 1903 again, Cuba and the U.S. sign a treaty allowing near total U.S. control of Cuban affairs, and the U.S. establishes a naval base at Guantanamo Bay. Now, back then in the early 1900s, the United States was supporting, for example, the fascist government under the Batista regime, which was then later toppled by Fidel Castro and the revolutionary movement within Cuba. And basically what that centered around was, again, the United States corporations and the mafia had deep ties within Cuba as well with their various casinos and other business ventures and shit. And you had all of this U.S. money that was pouring into Cuba under this fascist Batista regime, and they were there for one reason, and that was to extract the resources, extract profits off of this island, and in the meantime perpetuating a lot of the poverty that people in Cuba were facing at the time, which then led to the successes of Fidel Castro's revolution, which after he took power then actually managed to make significant progress in terms terms of literacy and economic development and relieving poverty. Now they have one of the best medical systems in the entire world, definitely superior relative to the United States. They've been shipping doctors all around the world throughout the COVID pandemic just to help other countries out. So, you have all of these situations where the United States has been not only, tacitly supporting, but actively backing and arming and funding far-right fascist dictatorships that have created a lot of the conditions that underlie why we were in the position right now that we are in, where a lot of these people are, facing a lot of those conditions to feel the need to end up fleeing some of that violence or poverty and come up here to the United States. But they continue. 1914, we're literally only in the early 1900s here. U.S. troops occupy the Mexican port of Veracruz for 7 months in an attempt to sway developments in the Mexican Revolution. 1954, Guatemalan President Jacobo Arbenz is overthrown in a CIA-backed coup attempt. 1961, the U.S.-backed Bay of Pigs invasion fails to overthrow Soviet-backed Cuban leader Fidel Castro, but Washington continues to launch attempts to assassinate Castro and dislodge his government. I think the estimate is that there were upwards of 600 assassination attempts on Fidel Castro. None of them obviously worked at the end of the day. But they continue saying 1964, leftist President João Goulart of Brazil is overthrown in a U.S.-backed coup that installs a military government lasting until the 1980s. And, comparable here, I don't know if they're going to bring up Chile in this list, but you still see, even in, modern, the modern situation that we are in right now, where the government of Chile, which just recently elected a sort of social democrat, Gabriel Boric, is still trying to replace the constitution that was written by the fascist U.S.-backed government of Augusto Pinochet back during the 1960s and 70s and onwards from that. They are still trying to deal with the consequences of some of this regime change in the Latin American countries by the United States. But they say 1965, U.S. forces land in the Dominican Republic to intervene in a civil war. 1970s, Argentina, Chile, and allied South American nations launch brutal campaign of repression and assassination aimed at perceived leftist threats, known as Operation Condor, which was often with U.S. support. They say 1980s, Reagan administration backs anti-communist Contra forces against Nicaragua's Sandinista government and backs the Salvadoran government against the leftist FMLN rebels. 1983, U.S. forces invade Caribbean island of Grenada after accusing the government of allying itself with communist Cuba. 1989, U.S. invades Panama to oust strongman Manuel Noriega. 1994, a U.S.-led invasion of Haiti is launched to remove the military regime installed by a 1991 coup that ousted President Jean-Bertrand Aristide. The invasion restores Aristide to power. 2002, Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez is ousted for 2 days before retaking power. He and his allies accuse the U.S. government of tacit support for the coup attempt. 2009, Honduran President Manuel Zelaya, overthrown by military, U.S. accused of worsening the situation by insufficient condemnation of the coup. And we could go on and on and on, literally all day, because again, there have been dozens of examples like this of the United States meddling in the affairs and the political situation and the economic situation of all of these different various countries in Central and South America. So my takeaway from this at the end of the day is, number one, obviously, it's not surprising in any way, shape, or form that somebody like Joe Biden, obviously a capitalist who has been a aggressive capitalist and imperialist throughout his entire tenure as a politician for nearly 50 years now within the United States Senate, and now as the president and previously the vice president, nothing surprising that he would be using this as a chance to do some anti-communist propaganda and bolster their bona fides, I guess, within somewhat conservative and liberal circles. So not surprising at all that they would use this type of language. But at the end of the day, the lesson here is very clear. The reason why a lot of these people are having to come to the United States right now is a direct result of really one core underlying factor here, and that is poverty. And poverty leads to things like political destabilization. It leads to an increase in violence. It leads to all of these other ripple effects that cause these people to feel the need that they have to leave a lot of these places. Now, again, this isn't to take away of any actual somewhat valid criticisms from a leftist perspective against some of the more authoritarian tendencies of some of these governments. But, at the end of the day, if you're going to come out here and pretend as if this is about communism as an economic philosophy or communism as an economic, framework for governing a country, then you are just completely delusional. It's absolutely insane to do that while completely whitewashing and glossing over and ignoring the role that the United States as a capitalist and violent imperialist empire has been engaging in all of these things in South America to not only, not only back a lot of these authoritarian governments, which again proves that we have no principled stance against authoritarianism inherently. I mean, again, you could take Cuba, you could take Colombia, you could take Chile, you could take all of these other various countries. I mean, I don't think there's a single country in Latin America that has not had some U.S. involvement in either toppling their leftist democratically elected governments or having CIA-backed coup attempts involved with these and backing and arming and funding a lot of these far-right militias and far-right fascist regimes. I mean, this is the role that the United States has played over the last number of decades, and to this day, again, it's not as if this is something that's just a matter of history. This is still happening to this day. Just saw this in Venezuela with the attempts to overthrow the Maduro government. I mean, still, I think to this day, even the Joe Biden administration recognizes Juan Guaido as the official leader of Venezuela, which is just completely fucking delusional. But again, the takeaway here is that if you were going to actually try to get to the core root of why some of these people are fleeing these situations in Central and South America, you should be looking first and foremost at the United States. Okay, we have been exploiting their resources, we have been exploiting their labor forces, we have been siding with and backing and arming far-right fascist dictatorships, and all that is done is created a situation of political instability for years, of increased violence, increases in police state involvement in lots of these countries, and completely decapitated any ability for leftists or even social democrats or socialists or communists to actually rise up in some of these countries and start to begin the process of alleviating the poverty that has again been directly caused and at least influenced significantly by the United States empire.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying